Stephen Doggett, welcome to the show. Thank you so much for your time. Stephen, for anybody that doesn't know you yet, can you introduce yourself, please?
Yeah, well, thank you, Daniel, and it's a great pleasure to have a chat to you today from so far. So I'm Stephen Doggett, so I'm the head of medical entomology at Westmead Hospital in Sydney, Australia. So most of my work revolves around mosquitoes, where we actually test mosquitoes for the presence of mosquito-borne disease. But I'm better known for this creature behind, namely bedbugs. Mm-hmm. And so over the years, I've been involved in research, teaching, education, and I was chief editor of the first industry standard on bedbugs called a Code of Practice for the Control of Bedbug Infestations in Australia. I've had a number of students, had a lot of publications, fortunately I've spoken around the world, and most recently I've had been the chief editor of a very exciting book on bedbugs, which I believe we're going to talk about later.
Yeah, absolutely, 100%. You being the chief editor, author, and the manager of your of the hospital, basically a lot of knowledge went into bedbugs. You found a funny correlation that really hit the nail on the current COVID situation, on something correlating between COVID and bedbug treatments in pest management. So, can you elaborate a little bit about that one, please?
Well, one thing that did strike me was the similarities between how we control COVID, or how we prevent the disease, and bedbug management. And probably the best example of this is to look to see what the Taiwanese have done and see how their mitigation strategies for COVID very much parallel that with bedbugs. And so Taiwan's done a fantastic job at minimising their number of human cases. They've only had some 449 human cases and some 7 deaths, which are still very unfortunate, but compared to other nations like the US, with what are they up to? 3.2 million cases and 134,000 deaths. I mean, it's a stark contrast. And so what happened with Taiwan is, we go back to 2003, they had an outbreak of sudden acquired respiratory syndrome disease known as SARS, which is also a type of coronavirus like COVID. Mm-hmm. And they had some 70-odd deaths and some 300-odd people infected. And the health department and the government said, this isn't good enough. We want to protect our people. And so they immediately implemented a pandemic plan in case this happened in the future. And when they suddenly heard about this inkling of some mysterious disease appearing in Wuhan in China, the plan was immediately enacted. And it revolved around preparation. It involved increased surveillance, prompt action. And if we look at how successful Taiwan have been, so they were prepared. They started acting early. They initiated quarantine of travellers. They undertook enhanced surveillance. Very importantly, they worked together as a nation. The party politics were put aside. It was a bipartisan approach, and said, we're going to work together. We're going to step back and let the clinical people direct the control. They undertook factual messaging based on science and denounced misinformation and even fake news. And of course, they wanted evidence-based solutions. And so many of these factors parallel what we do with quality bedbug control. So if we look at preparation, for example. So for those people who run hotels, motels, staff accommodation, essentially those who provide beds for others, they really should have a management plan in place. So that if bedbugs suddenly appear in their facility, then a management plan is turned on, it's enacted. And so back in 2011, I developed a management plan called I've forgotten the name of it. I'll think of it. So I developed a management plan back in 2011 called a bedbug management plan, bedbug management policy and procedural guide for accommodation providers. And so this management plan really had certain aspects. It basically defined who does what, so who had the tasks. It defined the procedures that needed in terms of documentation. It defined the control process. And having a management plan in place, and a management plan is up to date, can help minimise the spread of bed bugs. So that's the parallel between COVID in terms of preparation. Most importantly, if bed bugs is detected, you want to get onto the problem quickly, because if you act early, the bed bugs are less likely to spread, and spread particularly in multiple occupancy dwellings like hotels and low-income housing. The Taiwanese enacted quarantine, so travellers coming back from China, they went into quarantine. And this is a case if we have a infected room with bed bugs, and that the room has to be quarantined. Nobody should be allowed into the room, only those that have to go in for basically management. We need, like COVID, is to increase the amount of surveillance. So if you have a positive room, you inspect the adjoining rooms. If you're in a large accommodation block and you're getting a lot of bed bugs, there's no point just reacting to those that have been reported. You should go through and inspect every single room. And this is the key to COVID. And if we look at the most successful countries that have controlled COVID,
it's the one that
they haven't done they haven't done a little bit of testing. They've done lots of testing. So, for example, in Australia, for every positive case, there's been 190 tests. In China, it's about 1,000 tests. And if we look at, say, comparison, a country that's done very poor, like the US, there's only about 10 tests that have been done for every positive case. And this is inspired of President Trump saying that they've done a lot of testing. Yes, they have done a lot of testing, some 40 million tests, but it's tiny compared to what's needed to be, because you do a lot of testing to pick up those residual cases, those ones that haven't been detected. And they can be a source of infection for wider society. And it's the same with bed bugs. You want to pick up those rooms that haven't been detected, that haven't been uncovered, because then they become a source for other infections, infestations. And so, again, there's a lot of parallels there. But to keep going, so cooperation, as I said, in Taiwan, everybody got together with the one objective. They're on the one path to control COVID. They didn't have politicians that said, free this state or free that state, or we don't want to wear masks. No, the society was united. And this is similar to bed bugs. And so in the case of COVID, those societies that weren't united, where basically it become a platform for one's own ideology, they're the countries that have really suffered in a bad way. And so with bed bugs, the fact is when you have a bed bug infestation, you'll need people to do certain things. You may need the owner to do something. If in the case of a hotel, you may need the hotel engineering to come in, or the housekeeping to disconnect power leads, to remove headboards, to lift up carpet, to access areas that may be very difficult to control. And without cooperation with bed bugs or COVID, you will fail. Excuse me. Another thing about COVID is factual messaging. And that one thing with Taiwan, they were uniform in their media reports, in their messaging. They denounce basically misinformation. And this is the case with bed bugs as well. There's a lot of dubious products out there on the market, and we don't want to basically encourage them. We want to denounce them, and that's something that we do through the Australian industry standard. And by only having quality, evidence-based science, can we control bed bugs and can we control COVID? And so there's all these parallels between COVID mitigation and bedbug management that are just so obvious and so obvious to me. And there's one very important feature about the Taiwanese approach, that the approach did cost money initially. They had to spend quite a bit of money initially, but they've saved millions, if not billions, to the future. And the other key thing is that so many people who recover from COVID basically have chronic health problems, respiratory problems, heart disease, and they become a burden forevermore on the health system until they pass away, and they will die earlier. And so by spending quite a lot of money up front, you save a lot of money in the future. And a classic example of this was with a staff accommodation block that was attached to one of the major hospitals in Sydney, where bedbugs got into this facility, which had 320 rooms. If bedbugs were treated properly, it would have cost about 400 Australian dollars, so around 300 US. But they weren't treated. They were treated very badly, and bedbugs spread. And after 2 years, the decision was to inspect every single room and treat every single room that had bedbugs. And 10% of the rooms were found, which nobody knew had bedbugs. But this cost went from 400 Australian dollars to $40,000 to resolve.
Oh my God.
World Bank has said that the gross domestic product of the world will go down by $2 trillion. $2 trillion.
No way.
And if we all followed the lead of Taiwan, this amount would have been minuscule compared to that amount.
I love it. And I think also as the chief editor of FOBMA magazine, I think you're going to write about that, I think, right? So people
Indeed.
be in touch on you. Cool.
So, as you mentioned, I'm the chief editor of the FAYAT magazine, which I've been doing since January last year. And every issue, I write quite a few articles. And I've written a few articles about bed bugs and other articles. And indeed, this will be written into a story. In fact, I've completed the story. And in fact, I'm actually compiling this issue right now, pretty much as we speak, or in between when we speak.
So who has not subscribed yet should definitely Google FOBMA and get a subscription ready. Another thing, Stephen, that you mentioned to me that I would love to speak about is how COVID and the impact of bed bugs will change society. So that's a really interesting topic and a thesis that I would love to learn more about.
So you're saying how bed bugs will change in society following the COVID pandemic. And to answer that, and so often when we wish to answer a question, it's often best to look at history and see what happened in the lead up to the bedbug resurgence. So what happened with the bedbug resurgence? We believe that the modern bedbug, for want of a better term, it's the same species. The difference is that modern strains are highly resistant to the insecticides that we have out there. But we believe these modern bedbugs probably evolved in Africa. And we think that for a couple of reasons. One is that there's two species involved in the resurgence. And this is what is really strange. Most emerging issues involves one pest, one virion. It doesn't involve two at the same time. And so to explain why that happened, we have to think, okay, well, where were both of these species a problem? And bedbug problems were still a major issue in Africa. They didn't go through this quiescence period, this quiet period like we saw throughout the rest of the world. During the 80s, there was a lot of bedbug problems from both species, and some famous researchers did a lot of work on that. And so but where a lot of the bedbug problems were in Africa were in these villages that were being treated for against malaria. And so we suspect that a lot of the resistance evolved inadvertently due to malaria control. And it's actually a real problem now because these modern bedbugs are incredibly resistant that they actually use bed nets. The bed nets that are used to prevent being bitten from malaria mosquitoes, from the Anopheles mosquitoes. Bedbugs are using these sites as harbourages. And so what is happening in a lot of African nations, a lot of the people have stopped using bed nets because they associate with bedbugs. And we're seeing a rise in malaria cases.
Really?
And it's quite extraordinary to think, bedbugs, well, they're horrible, they're uncomfortable, the bites are painful, but people prefer not to have bedbugs over the risk of death. And it's quite extraordinary. And I'm working with a number of African groups on this very issue today. And so if we go back and so we say that bedbugs probably, the modern bedbug probably evolved in Africa. And we started seeing bed bugs really in the backpacking industry in the late 90s. And that was the case in Australia. It was probably those younger travellers who went to these more exotic nations like Africa and went to these rural villages, these what we would consider fairly basic sort of villages, and probably picked up the bed bugs and brought them back. And they started spreading through backpackers. And when you think in particular hostels, they're fairly densely packed. You'll have 6 to 8 people in a room. And so there was a great opportunity for the bedbug populations to build up. And then we started seeing bed bugs expand, started spreading into more mainstream hotels. Then people started bringing them home. And then bed bugs spread into wider society, so that we saw them in planes, trains, automobiles, massage tables, retail outlets, cafes, brothels. I've never seen them there. You may have, Daniel, I don't know. But they spread into wide society. And what was the tragic part is that they got into low-income housing, into the very group that don't have the fiscal resources to pay for control, and sometimes even the cognitive awareness to know that bed bugs were a problem. And so often we saw infestations explode, and we often saw these super infestations involving tens of thousands of bed bugs. And when we see that happening within apartment complexes, what happens is a bed bug spread. And we've seen apartment complexes with 20% of rooms infested. In the US, in some cases, it's 100% of rooms. So to come back to what we see in the future, well, what we're seeing now is people aren't travelling. We're seeing hotels in lockdown and without guests. So yes, there was bed bugs present in hotels, but we've seen a decline of bed bugs in hotels. They're not as common as what they used to be. And because there hasn't been the guests, there's a good chance a lot of the bed bugs will just naturally die out. So a bed bug will live for about 5 months at 22 degrees Celsius without a blood meal. But that's the extreme. Most of the population will die off before then. If the hotel is in a cold climate and all air conditioning is turned off, which is likely, then they can live much longer. But we're no doubt going to see a decline in bed bugs in hotels because people aren't going to hotels and travelling. We'll see a decline in bed bugs in people's homes and public transport and that sort of situation.
Yeah.
The worrying aspect is that a lot of pest controllers have not been able to get into social housing because of fear of COVID.
Yes.
And we could well expect bed bug problems to become much worse in social housing. And they've become the reservoir for bed bugs in wider society.
I understand. Okay.
So I'm expecting we'll see a decline in bed bug numbers, but they'll come back again without a question.
In a bigger extreme. Interesting.
Time will tell, but they'll be more concentrated in low-income housing, much bigger. But we may see a more rapid spread to wider society than what we did early on at the start of the bedbug resurgence.
Interesting theory. I would suggest plus 12 months from today, we're going to revisit that topic and going to reassess whether that was true and really spread this much. Could be interesting, right?
Oh, it could be, yes. So time will tell. It's like all these things of the future.
Yeah. Speaking of the future, Stephen, last but not least, I would really love your take on how, everybody's talking about sustainability or digital approach in pest control, etc. So you as a bedbug specialist, how do you think, sustainable methods over, insecticides or even digital monitoring traps can or will at all affect or influence the bedbug control?
Well, let's break it up into, say, pesticides versus traps and monitoring. So let's break it up. Now, when it comes to pesticides, because insecticide resistance has been so powerful, it's forced us to do those non-chemical approaches. I mean, we had no choice. And I still think vacuuming, to me, is the best option for bedbug control. You can buy quite a cheap vacuum and really rapidly reduce the bedbug population. You probably won't control it unless it's a small population, but you can reduce the biomass in the infestation very rapidly. And the key things is you want to vacuum ideally with plastic hoses. You can run hot water through to control them. One with a disposable bag that you can take out, seal up, and then dispose of. Preferably a vacuum with a HEPA filter. So one of these filters that can basically remove all these particulate matters and even bedbug antigens. Because in the end, you want to protect your technician. And insects can cause respiratory problems. You can develop an allergy to them, a sensitivity. And so we need to protect the workers. And it's very important that we do. And so if we look at the more, the less toxic chemicals around at the moment, well, obviously the desiccant dust. And desiccant dust vary quite a lot. They work quite well. But if we take diatomaceous earth in the powder form, it can take a couple of weeks to actually work. In the meantime, a bedbug could get a blood meal and then overcome that desiccation effect. Products like silica dioxide seem to be much quicker and kill bedbugs very rapidly. We don't fully understand how they work. It's said that they can dissolve the waxy cuticle layer of the bedbugs, but the fact is with a silica dioxide, they'll start dying within hours. And that doesn't make sense to me that this mode of action could be just desiccation. Something else is going on. Heat treatments can work if they're used properly. I haven't done a lot of heat because we don't use a lot in Australia. And I see a lot of pest technicians buy heat units, quite expensive heat units, but they fail. And they fail because they don't understand thermodynamics. They don't understand heat flow. They don't understand heat sinks, such as the brickwork behind you, which can be a major heat sink, but also cause thermal protection to any bed bugs that are on the wall. And so there's a lot of knowledge when it comes to thermal control. And if you're thinking about getting to that, go and work with somebody else that's been doing it for a long time. That would be my suggestion. Just don't go out and buy anything. You've got to learn. You've got to learn about heat flow. You've got to have a lot of sensors throughout a room to make sure you haven't got dead spots where treatment failure could occur. And no matter what form of control you do, one of the most important things that you've got to do is you've got to come back. You've got to come back to allow eggs to hatch, to check to see if you're successful. Now, one interesting thing is that most pest controllers would say that they're successful about 99% of the time when it comes to bedbug control. I would estimate the actual figure is between 30 and 50%. And most pest controllers, every pest controller out there who's done bedbugs will fail, and you will fail into the future. But it's important that you realise that you've failed, not your client. Because the fact is, if the client does their in your back, that's not a sign that you've failed or you've been successful. It just means they probably don't want to use you again. And don't expect them ever to use you again. And chances are it'll be straight on the social media saying what a incompetent bunch of idiots you've got. And so no matter what you do, you've always got to come back at least once. You may, in a severe infestation, you may come back 4 or 5 times to constantly check the progress of your treatment to make sure you're successful. And if you've got winter coming on, when it gets colder, bedbugs become less active. And I've seen the infestation come back at the start of summer. And again, that's something you need to think about. So bedbug eggs take about, depending on the temperature, 7 to 10 days to hatch at around 22 to 25 Celsius. So you've got to come back to allow for that. In colder climates, much longer. But always come back. So don't rely on your client to be bitten as a indication that the bedbugs are gone.
It's really interesting to reassess this in the future when we are going to have profound proof for maybe a COVID correlating, the effects of COVID correlating with bedbug increase, decrease, or stagnation. We're going to find out. Then again, there are so many digital helpers in the pest control field. So many people creating new Internet of Things connected devices. I know there are some bedbug traps by some of the leading pest control operating companies in the world, but also by some new startups. There was a Finnish startup called Spotter, things like that. Do you think you had a very interesting statement about the cost of a unit and also the time frame to control the trap? So maybe something about that.
Yes, there's a lot of problems when it comes to bedbug traps. And one thing you don't see is a lot of independent research is actually promoting them, and it's good reason, because often the testing is just simply not being done. But there's several key limiting factors when it comes to traps, and probably one of the most important is actually cost. If it's more than about $4 US per room, then hotels aren't interested. And in many countries, even that is way too much. And simply, we've seen a decline in bedbugs in hotels. They're just not as common as what they used to be. And if bedbugs aren't an ongoing problem, why would a hotel want to actually pay for these? In the US, where litigation is rife, there's a great impetus to do it, because they want to protect not only the brand, but also prevent litigation. And by having a trap there, it shows you're actually doing something, even if the trap may not actually do anything, to be honest. The problem with a lot of traps in hotels is that they're just way too expensive. And we've seen many come on the market and just disappear. Many are just too big. And so there's nowhere convenient in a hotel room to put them without basically saying, or almost saying or advertising, yes, I've got a bedbug problem. And if you've got a trap that's blatantly obvious, well, it suggests maybe you've got a bedbug problem and it's not something you want your guests to see. The other issue is that, well, do they work? Pheromones have a very limited area of attraction, maybe a foot. Many of the attractants, heat, and these are the pheromones. Often the pheromones have to be replaced frequency. They're not a slow release. They are in some. But the fact is, in a bed, you've got this roughly a 70-kilo lump of meat that's pushing out carbon dioxide, and they're pushing out heat. They're pushing out all these attractants. And bedbugs evolved to bite this very creature. Exactly. And how are these traps going to outcompete this huge lump of meat? Well, it's not going to happen. That's reality. And I'm very suspicious about all the traps out there. Maybe in low-income housing, some of these pitfall traps could be used. They can be used. They're quite cheap, but they can fail quite rapidly too. And a colleague of mine in the UK has shown that some of these devices, if bedbugs are in there, they don't escape, but the bedbugs just will not go in there. Some of these products have a lip, and the bedbugs just run around the lip, and they don't fall in. And so a lot of these devices where publications have been released have done by people who've got a commercial interest in the product.
So there is no silver bullet or such thing?
Oh, no. And I remember testing some of these devices some years ago when I was testing another product and found that as soon as you got a little bit of accumulation of dirt, even after a week, the bed bugs would start climbing out. And it's a problem. And so when it comes to bed bugs, all these new products, and we've seen these new products on it, I sort of roll my eyes, and I tend not to even put them in the Fayetteville magazine, because I prefer to stick to. One thing about the Fayetteville magazine is we're not out to make money. We want to have quality information. That's so different to every pest control publication on the market. We want quality. Who cares if it makes money? I'm doing it voluntary, so I don't need to make money. That'd be nice, but, you know. Not really. But and so I just want this as a journal aim at the upper end of the market, the technical managers, the leaders of the industry, to provide quality information to them. And so our articles are much bigger, they're much broader, there's fewer of them, but it's not full of adverts. And I don't want to put new products in there unless there's something interesting. But having said that, the idea of a trap where there's 24/7, which sends an alert back to whoever, probably housekeeping would be best, is a great idea. I mean, it's a fantastic. In fact, I've wrote in the past about the benefits of it. But reality and a great idea are two completely different things, sadly, Daniel.
I agree with you. And it always depends on the value calculation, and whether the value calculation shows then that the budget is not at all matching the device. Then we have a spread that is not yet matched. To be discussed in the near future when more innovation is gonna hit the market. Stephen, thank you so much. Can you tell us something and show us maybe the book you've written?
Well, I have several books. So the first one, and because there's a bit of a reflection here, I'll try to hold it up. So this was like a help guide that I produced around 7 years ago. Do you have bed bugs? So do you have bed bugs? Help guide for the identification of bed bug infestations. It's a picture book showing people where bed bugs occur and what they look like. And this has been translated into a number of languages. And if anybody wants to have it translated into their own language, by all means, contact me. We can come to some arrangement. The other book that came out last year is Advances in the Biology and Management of Modern Bed Bugs. So I'm the chief editor, was my baby, and I worked very closely with two terrific colleagues and two icons in the industry, Professor Denny Miller, who's one of the great legends in the US and a wonderful, wonderful character and a beautiful person, and the fantastic Professor Chow-Yang Lee, really the leading person in the urban pest control research area in Asia. And sadly, they just lost him because he moved to the US. And this particular book, it's over 400 pages. There's some 48 chapters, some over 60 authors from 13 different nations across the world.
Wow.
There's 8 main sections. So this is actually the first academic book for 50 years. Now, I say academic because it is academic in nature, in that the literature was reviewed, but the book is written in very easy to read format. And so pretty much all the book can be read by anybody with any experience. And there's only, I think, 3 chapters that are very technical. But there's 8 main chapters. There's bed bugs through history. We focus on the bed bug resurgence, where we look at what's happened with the bed bug resurgence across the major continents around the world. There's information here that's never been seen before. There's sections of bed bugs biology, bed bug control in specific situations, bed bugs in the law, and bed bugs in the future. And this was written before COVID, so COVID wasn't factored into this. And this has put a spanner in our chapter, sadly. But we've got the icons of the industry, you know, the experts in the world are in this book.
And it's
not in this book,
right? So we can put the link on in the description, and everybody wants to get it. Follow the link, please.
Yeah, sadly it was quite expensive, ridiculously expensive, and I'm hoping it's a bit cheaper these days. And widely the publisher will reduce the price, but yeah. But I'm very proud of the book. It took 4 years to produce. There's a lot of work, and there's information that'll be used there, relevant for the industry as a whole when it comes to bedbug management, really for decades to come.
Yeah. Superb. So, Stephen, thank you so much for all the things we discussed. I mean, especially the correlation between bedbugs and COVID. Really interesting stuff there. We're going to revisit that again, and you stay safe and sound. Thank you so much.
And if anybody wants to look at the Fayettman magazine, it costs you a whole $0 except for your time on the internet. If you go to www.fayettman.org. Sorry, I'll get that right. Sorry, if you want to, So if anybody wants to read the Fayettman magazine, it costs you absolutely nothing. It's free. You go to www.fayettman, that's FAOPMA.com. The last issue is not on the website at the moment because the website's going through a major revision. But if anybody wants to email Daniel to be put on the list, he can pass your contact on to me. Absolutely. And I'll email you when the next one will be out, because we've got another one coming out about 2 to 3 weeks. And Fayettman, very excitingly, is about to announce a virtual conference late in the year on 18th and 19th of November, focusing on how you, the pest controller and the pest control company, can survive and overcome the problems associated with Fayettman. So it's surviving beyond Fayettman. So it's one of the most exciting programs I've ever seen. I'm actually on the organising committee, and it's a great honour to work with some fantastic people. And we're actually finalising the program now and hoping to advertise that, and we will advertise it in the next issue. So keep an eye out for that, Daniel.
We will. It's a must-see event, I think, and we're going to put all the links in the description so people follow Stephen, really the guy for bed bugs and much more innovation in pest control. So thank you so much, Stephen, again.
So thanks, Daniel, for giving me the opportunity to speak to everybody. And to everybody, best wishes. I hope this all gets over soon, and I hope we can sort of meet face to face. There's so many colleagues out there. I just want to give a hug because I haven't seen them, and fortunately, they're all survived, and my family's so far so good. But with the COVID situation getting worse daily, I mean, it's just terrifying. So to all of you, good luck to the future, and I hope to see you all in person.